Speaker is Zachary Pohlman, who's the editor-in-chief of the Notre Dame Law Review.
Thank you. My blog post starts with the premise that regular in-person gatherings at churches and other houses of worship were suddenly stopped in mid-March, and that now, even though we're 6 months out from the initial outbreak and churches have begun to reopen, religious attendees are attending religious services in much lower numbers than they were before the pandemic. My blog post explores some of the implications of the church shutdown and gradual reopening from both a legal and religious perspective. From a legal perspective, I take on a very narrow question, namely, how does the shutdown affect a church's eligibility for tax benefit purposes? Under the tax code, churches receive special tax benefits beyond those received by other 501c3s, such that it becomes necessary to define what counts as a church. In a forthcoming article, Lloyd Meyer and I argue that churches should be defined by what's called a congregational approach, a test currently used in a few federal circuits. We define the congregational approach as the regular in-person gathering of individuals to engage in worship and other communal religious activities. Now, there's obviously a lot going on in that definition, but the coronavirus raises an interesting question. What happens to the congregational approach during a pandemic when in-person church gatherings are not possible? I argue that so long as a community of religious believers intends to hold regular in-person religious gatherings, transitory crises that make such gatherings impossible should not cause a church to lose its status as a church for tax purposes. And the test for measuring this intent is easy enough. If the congregation met regularly before the transitory crisis, we'll presume it will continue to do so once the crisis passes. Turning then to a religious perspective, I ask what effect the last 6 months might have on how churchgoers themselves conceive of what it means to be a church. Again, my focus is pretty narrow. I suspect it's possible that as religious services were moved from churches to living rooms, aspects of church life previously thought inviolable, things like liturgy and ritual and community, may seem less important. My blog post focuses on revitalizing the important role that community in particular should play in what it means to be a church. In my own Catholic tradition, a church has never been understood to be merely a physical building. Rather, as Jesus tells us, where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there I am in the midst of them. But even beyond the strictly theological, churches and religious congregations of all faiths can provide a source of community unparalleled by non-religious groups. I'm hopeful that given the stress and despair the last 6 months have caused many, if ever there was a time for a resurgence in church attendance and a culture that truly values religion and religious liberty, this is it. At least I so pray. Thanks.